Elena's stepping aside. We're restructuring her position. My boss Richard announced to all my clients while I sat right there at the company meeting. The words hit me like ice water. Even though I was presenting the quarterly numbers I'd just achieved, every single client renewed the best results in company history. My arthritis was flaring from the morning rain, making my hands stiff as I reached for my reading glasses, and now they started trembling for an entirely different reason. 8 of our most important clients, Morrison Industries, Patterson Enterprises, Davis Group, people I'd worked with for 25 years, stared at me in shocked silence. Vanessa Torres will be taking over your accounts, Richard continued, his voice carrying that satisfaction I'd been hearing more often lately. She's our best performer with an outstanding track record. Outstanding track record. Vanessa had been here 8 months. 25 years of relationship building, reduced to a personnel announcement in front of the very people whose loyalty I'd earned through countless personal conversations, remembered birthdays, and crisis management that Richard had always dismissed as socializing. Morrison shifted uncomfortably in his chair. The same Morrison who trusted me because I scheduled his meetings for Tuesday mornings after his Monday dialysis treatments. Patterson looked genuinely confused. The woman who relied on me because I was the only person who remembered her daughter's college graduation and her late husband's favorite business strategies. My face flushed with rage, mixing with the physical pain already coursing through my joints. These clients had watched me save their accounts during tough times, maintain their satisfaction through 3 management changes, and deliver results that kept this company profitable. Richard was dismissing me like I was disposable. I completely understand, I replied, my voice steady despite everything. These decisions are never easy. Relief flashed across Richard's face. He'd clearly expected tears, protests, or anger. After all, I was a 54-year-old woman being pushed aside for someone young enough to be my daughter. What Richard didn't know was that I had been expecting this moment for weeks, ever since I'd overheard him on the phone with Vanessa, talking about transitioning Elena out and bringing in fresh energy. I could feel every eye in the room watching for my reaction, the dramatic breakdown everyone expected from a woman being professionally erased. Instead, I smiled. "You're absolutely right, Richard," I said calmly, closing my leather portfolio and standing up despite the pain in my knees. "I'll leave these client files for the transition." I placed my portfolio directly in front of him on the conference table, making sure every client could see the worn leather folder that contained 25 years of relationship intelligence. Richard's confident expression shifted slightly as he looked down at the files, but he was too pleased with his announcement to pay real attention. What Richard didn't know, what he'd never bothered to discover in all the years he'd dismissed my work as traditional relationship building, was what those files actually contained. Every client in that room had my personal phone number, not the company phone, my personal cell phone that I'd given them years ago for emergencies. When clients needed help after hours, they called me. When they had problems with their accounts, they called me. When they wanted to discuss new business, they called me. Richard thought he was giving Vanessa my job, but you can't give away relationships that were never yours to begin with. When he opened those files later and saw 25 years of personal phone numbers, personal notes about families and problems and dreams, personal trust that I'd built one conversation at a time, his hands would start shaking, because he'd just fired the only person these clients actually trusted. The next morning, Richard called me into his office with obvious satisfaction. Through the glass conference room, I could see Vanessa already going through what she thought were my client files, the basic contact sheets Richard had given her, that told her nothing about who these people actually were. "Elena, I wanted to personally thank you for handling yesterday so professionally," Richard said, settling back in his leather chair. "I know transitions can be difficult." I had spent the night thinking about Morrison's upcoming dialysis appointment, Patterson's quarterly review that would require delicate handling because business discussions still reminded her of her late husband, and Davis's expansion plans that he'd been confiding in me about for months. These weren't just professional obligations anymore. They were personal relationships about to be destroyed. "Vanessa's already diving into the accounts," Richard continued, gesturing toward the conference room where I could see her confidently flipping through pages. She's exactly what we need, young, hungry, understands how business works today. How business works today, as if caring about clients was somehow outdated. Richard leaned forward, his voice taking on that condescending tone I'd grown to hate over the past year. Between you and me, Elena, your approach has always been very personal. Too personal, really. Vanessa understands that business relationships need boundaries. Boundaries. That's what he called it when I remembered Morrison's medical appointments, or when I checked on Patterson after her husband's funeral, or when I took Davis's calls on weekends because his business problems kept him awake at night. There's something else, Richard said, pulling out a folder with obvious pleasure. We're moving you to administrative support. Filing, data entry, basic office tasks. The pay cut will be significant, but it's better than losing your job entirely. Administrative support. 25 years of expertise reduced to filing papers and answering phones. The final humiliation delivered with a smile. I understand, I said simply. Richard looked almost disappointed by my calm reaction. He'd clearly been hoping for drama he could use to justify his decision later. As I walked back to my new desk in the corner, a small workspace near the filing cabinets where I'd be sorting papers like a secretary, I could hear Vanessa on the phone in the conference room. Mr. Morrison, this is Vanessa Torres from Meridian Solutions. I'm your new account manager. I'm scheduling a review meeting for next Monday at 10 a.m. We'll go over your account and discuss opportunities for growth. Monday at 10, Morrison's dialysis day. He'd never agreed to that. My personal phone buzzed in my pocket. A text from Morrison. Elena, got a strange call from someone new. Is everything okay? You know I can't do Monday meetings. I smiled as I typed back. Everything's fine. Don't worry about Monday. Through the glass, I watched Vanessa making notes in her planner, completely unaware that she'd just scheduled a meeting that would never happen. She had the contact information, the contract details, the service history, everything Richard thought mattered. What she didn't have was the knowledge that Morrison trusted me enough to text me directly when something felt wrong. She didn't know that Patterson would call my personal phone if she felt uncomfortable with a new person. She didn't understand that Davis had my home number and used it regularly. 25 years of real relationships, and Richard thought they could be transferred with a file folder. By the end of the week, he would understand exactly what he'd given away. And it wasn't just my job. By Thursday morning, my personal phone had become the center of a crisis Richard didn't even know was happening yet. The first call came while I was filing papers at my new administrative desk, watching Vanessa through the glass conference room as she confidently typed on her laptop, completely unaware that her carefully planned week was about to fall apart. Elena, I need to talk to you. Morrison's voice was strained when I answered quietly. This new girl has called me 3 times trying to set up a meeting for Monday. I told her I can't do Mondays because of my dialysis, but she keeps insisting it's the only time that works for her schedule. I glanced around to make sure Richard wasn't nearby. I'm sorry you're dealing with that. She doesn't seem to understand that Monday is my medical day. I've explained it twice, but she keeps saying the company needs to optimize meeting efficiency. Elena, I've been flexible for 25 years. You've always worked around my medical needs. Now suddenly I'm the problem? Before I could respond fully, my phone buzzed with another call. Patterson. 20 minutes later, it was Davis calling with his own frustrations about Vanessa's approach to his account. Each conversation followed the same pattern: confusion, frustration, and ultimately the same question. Can I still call you when I have problems? That afternoon, Richard knocked on my filing desk with a puzzled expression. Elena, we're having some communication issues with a few accounts. Morrison seems resistant to scheduling. Patterson is asking too many questions about our procedures, and Davis appears confused about our service offerings. Communication issues. 3 of our biggest clients were actively avoiding their new account manager, and Richard called it communication issues. Could you maybe give Vanessa some background information? Help smooth things over? Help smooth things over. He wanted me to fix the mess he'd created by replacing relationship expertise with corporate efficiency. "I'll see what I can do," I said. That evening, I sat in my car in the parking lot and returned the calls on my personal phone. Each conversation revealed the same underlying truth: these weren't just business relationships that could be transferred with a file folder. They were personal connections built on trust, understanding, and genuine care that had developed over decades. Morrison had been through 2 heart surgeries and a diabetes diagnosis during our years working together. I'd adjusted meeting schedules, deadlines, and even contract terms to accommodate his health needs. Vanessa saw his medical requirements as inconvenient scheduling conflicts. Patterson still struggled with business decisions that reminded her of her late husband. I'd learned to present options gently, give her time to process, and never pressure her when grief made concentration difficult. Vanessa treated her questions as signs of incompetence rather than emotional processing. Davis valued loyalty and personal connection in business relationships because too many companies had treated his family business like a number on a spreadsheet. I'd earned his trust by remembering his father's military service, his daughter's college graduation, his concerns about keeping family traditions alive in a corporate world. Vanessa approached him with generic corporate presentations about maximizing engagement potential. As I drove home that night, I realized Richard had made a fundamental miscalculation. He assumed that successful client relationships were about contracts and service agreements. He'd never understood that people don't just buy services, they buy trust, understanding, and genuine care. What Richard didn't know was that 25 years of trust doesn't transfer with a personnel announcement. By Monday morning, he would start learning exactly what that meant. Friday morning brought the emergency meeting I'd been expecting. Richard's confident demeanor from earlier in the week had evaporated, replaced by barely controlled panic as he called Vanessa and me into the conference room. The irony wasn't lost on me, sitting at the same table where he'd announced my dismissal just 4 days earlier, now desperately needing my help to understand why his brilliant plan was crumbling. "We're having some adjustment challenges with a few accounts," Richard announced, shuffling through papers with obvious frustration. "Nothing we can't handle, just some communication gaps that need addressing." Adjustment challenges. Morrison had refused to reschedule his medical treatments. Patterson had canceled her account review entirely after Vanessa questioned her authority to make business decisions. Davis had stopped returning calls altogether. Richard's eyes kept darting to his phone, which had been unusually quiet all morning. For a man who normally fielded calls from satisfied clients praising the company's service, the silence was deafening. "Since you know these clients' histories, maybe you could help Vanessa understand their preferences," Richard continued, his tone carefully neutral despite the desperation underneath. Their preferences. 25 years of relationship building, reduced to understanding someone's preferred meeting times. I listened as Vanessa explained her systematic approach to account management, standardized procedures, efficiency protocols, professional boundaries, everything that sounded impressive in business school, but crumbled when applied to real human relationships. What struck me most was how completely she misunderstood the nature of her failures. She genuinely believed the clients were being unreasonable, that their requests for accommodation were signs of poor business practices rather than the foundation of successful long-term partnerships. "I'll reach out to them individually," I offered. "See if I can help clarify the situation." Richard's relief was visible. "Good. I knew you'd be able to fix this." Fix this. He wanted me to repair relationships he'd broken by treating them as transferable assets. That afternoon, my personal phone confirmed what I already knew was happening. 3 separate calls from 3 different clients, all asking the same fundamental question: whether they should continue working with a company that clearly didn't understand or value their needs. Each conversation followed a similar pattern. Initial frustration with Vanessa's approach, growing concern about the company's direction, and ultimately, the question that Richard would never see coming. "Elena, if you started your own consulting business, would you consider taking us with you?" The seed of an idea that had been forming all week suddenly crystallized into a clear path forward. I'd spent 25 years building relationships while Richard took credit for the results. I'd generated millions in revenue while he dismissed my methods as outdated. I'd created client loyalty so strong that people were willing to follow me anywhere, and he'd never even realized those relationships belonged to me, not the company. By Sunday evening, I'd made 3 phone calls that would change everything. Not to clients this time, but to lawyers, accountants, and business advisors. People who could help me understand exactly what was possible when someone with my track record decided to stop working for other people's success and start building their own. Richard thought he'd solved his problems by demoting me to filing papers. What he'd actually done was give me the time and motivation to become his biggest competitor. Monday morning was going to be very interesting. Monday morning, Richard's phone started ringing at 7:30, and I could hear every conversation from my filing desk in the corner. The first call was Morrison Industries. Richard's voice carried across the office with forced cheerfulness that quickly turned to confusion, then desperation. "Morrison, good morning. What do you mean you're terminating the contract? Let's discuss this rationally." "No, wait, don't hang up." I continued organizing files while listening to Richard frantically dial Vanessa's extension. 5 minutes later, she rushed into his office, looking panicked as he explained that their biggest client had just walked away. The irony was perfect. Richard had spent the weekend feeling confident that Monday would bring solutions, that Elena, the filing clerk, would somehow smooth over these minor communication issues. Instead, Monday brought the reckoning he'd never seen coming. Patterson Enterprises called 30 minutes later. I could hear fragments of the conversation. Something about feeling disrespected, about working with people who understood family businesses, about taking their account elsewhere. Richard's voice grew more strained with each failed attempt to salvage the relationship. By the time Davis Group called with their termination notice, Richard had stopped trying to sound professional. His desperation was audible across the office as he offered discounts, promised changes, begged for reconsideration. "Davis, we've worked together for years." "What? Elena? What does Elena have to do with this?" My hands paused in their filing as I listened to Richard discover what I'd known all along, that these relationships had never belonged to him. "I don't understand. She recommended another company? When did you talk to Elena?" Richard's eyes found me across the office. I was sitting calmly at my filing desk, organizing papers like nothing extraordinary was happening. "Davis, Elena doesn't handle accounts anymore." "I see. Yes, I understand." The silence after he hung up was deafening. Richard sat in his office for several minutes, staring at his phone like it had personally betrayed him. Then he walked over to my desk, his face pale with dawning comprehension. "Elena," his voice was dangerously quiet. "Davis just told me you recommended he switch companies. Is that true?" I looked up from my filing with innocent surprise. "He asked for my advice. I gave it." "You gave it? Elena, you can't just—" "Actually, Richard, I can. They're not my clients anymore, remember? They're just friends asking for business advice." The word friends hit him like a physical blow. For the first time, Richard was beginning to understand the difference between having accounts and having relationships. "What have you done?" he whispered. I smiled and pulled out my personal cell phone, setting it on my desk where he could see it clearly. "I haven't done anything. I just answered my phone when my friends called." My phone, not the company phone. My relationships, not the company's relationships. Richard's hands were visibly shaking now as the full scope of his miscalculation became clear. He'd thought he was managing personnel. What he'd actually done was declare war on 25 years of trust, loyalty, and genuine care. "They're calling you directly," he said, his voice hollow with realization. "They always have," I replied simply. "You just never bothered to ask how these relationships actually worked." The phone on his desk rang again. Another client, no doubt, with another termination notice. Richard's empire was crumbling one relationship at a time, and there was nothing he could do to stop it, because the foundation had never been his to begin with. By Wednesday morning, Richard's crisis had become the talk of the entire company. 3 major clients terminated in 2 days, with more threatening to follow. The revenue loss was catastrophic, nearly 40% of our annual income gone in less than a week, I continued filing papers at my corner desk, watching through the glass as Richard held emergency meetings with executives, lawyers, and accountants. Everyone looking for someone to blame, some way to salvage the disaster. No one understanding that the foundation of their business had walked out the door when they dismissed the person who'd built it. The irony was exquisite. Richard had demoted me to administrative support to put me in my place. Instead, he'd given me a front-row seat to watch his empire crumble while freeing me from any responsibility to help save it. My personal phone had become busier than the office phone ever was. Not just Morrison, Patterson, and Davis anymore, but other clients who'd heard what happened and wanted to understand their options. Word was spreading through the business community that Elena Martinez was available for consultation. Thursday afternoon brought the conversation I'd been expecting. Richard appeared at my filing desk, looking like he'd aged 5 years in 5 days. "Elena, I think there's been a misunderstanding," he began, his voice carefully controlled. "About your role here, about the changes we made. Maybe we were too hasty." Too hasty. He was offering to undo my demotion now that he understood what it had cost him. "I appreciate that, Richard, but I don't think there's been any misunderstanding," I replied, continuing to organize files. "You were very clear about what you wanted. Fresh thinking, modern approaches, Vanessa's strategic perspective. The clients are asking for you specifically," he continued. "They trust you. Maybe we could work out some kind of arrangement where you handle the relationship side while Vanessa manages the technical aspects." Handle the relationship side. After 25 years of building this business, he wanted me to be the relationship specialist while someone else got credit for strategy. "That's thoughtful of you, but I've actually been exploring other opportunities," I said, pulling out a business card from my desk drawer. "Elena Martinez Consulting. I'm launching my own practice." Richard's face went white as he read the card. "You can't do that. There's a non-compete clause in your employment agreement." I smiled. "Actually, there isn't. I checked. Apparently, when you demoted me to administrative support, that voided my original management contract. Filing clerks don't have non-compete restrictions." The legal irony was perfect. In his haste to humiliate me, Richard had inadvertently freed me from the very restrictions that would have prevented me from competing with him. "Elena, please, we can work something out. Name your terms." Name my terms. After dismissing me as obsolete, he was now begging me to save his company. "My terms are simple, Richard. I'm starting over, building something based on the values you dismissed as old-fashioned. Genuine relationships, personal attention, caring about clients as people, not just revenue sources." My phone buzzed with another text. Another client asking about my new consulting service. "You're taking them all, aren't you?" Richard whispered. I stood up from my filing desk, gathering my personal belongings for the last time. "I'm not taking anyone, Richard. They're choosing to come with me. There's a difference." As I walked toward the door, I passed the conference room where Vanessa was sitting alone, surrounded by empty file folders and a phone that had stopped ringing. The woman who was supposed to revolutionize our client relationships was now managing 0 relationships. Richard had gotten exactly what he'd asked for: a modern, efficient operation with fresh thinking and strategic approaches. What he'd lost was everything that actually mattered. Outside, my new life was waiting, built on 25 years of trust that no one could take away because it had never belonged to the company in the first place. It belonged to me,